To those unfamiliar with the hardcore scene, it can be a little intimidating. From the outside, it seems like a culture dominated by anger, violence, and substance abuse. Loud music with little technique blasts in the listener's ears with almost indecipherable lyrics, and men covered in tattoos with X'd up fists mosh, a dance technique which involves the swinging of fists in what's called the pit, where many end up stumbling out of with cut lips and black eyes. But is hardcore really so bad? And what exactly is straight edge? We set out to determine what the hardcore straight edge music and subculture was really like.
When Rhiannon and I went to the Connecticut Edge Fest in October, a large concert dedicated to straight edge bands, which we heard about through Facebook, we were a little nervous to say the least, even though we were both somewhat familiar with the scene. I had heard about it from my brother and my friends, and Rhiannon had heard about it through the internet. My brother Dan was playing in 2 bands that night, and though we were excited to see him perform, we knew we wouldn't know anyone else there, and for the most part would be alone in the crowds. We paid $10 each to get in and received a wristband. The show took place in a small venue, some sort of small formal hall rented out for the occasion, and a number of people were standing around talking. There were also quite a few vendors selling merchandise for the bands, and lots of volunteers helping the bands carry in their instruments.
Most of the people there were a little scary looking, but in actuality were all really nice and polite. Most people there dressed in dark clothes and had tattoos, but there were also quite a few who were dressed quite nicely for the occasion, in dresses or button-ups and khakis. A majority of people there had black X's sharpied onto the back of each hand to indicate that they identified as straight edge. We were introduced to a lot of people who were excited to hear about that we were interested in hardcore and straight edge in general.
6 bands took the floor that night, 4 of which had exclusively straight edge members. Hardcore bands tend to be heavier on guitar and usually have the drum set playing on every beat. The singer doesn't usually sing either. They tend to shout in a very rough voice, and it can be hard to understand. The bass guitar plays simple riffs. The most complex the songs get is with a tempo change from fast to faster. Most bands in the hardcore scene have little to no formal music education. It ends up being a loud, overwhelming sound, and Rhiannon and I regretted not bringing earplugs. But the energy of the bands and the audiences was infectious. Each song was given a short intro by the singer and then counted off by the drummer. All the songs we heard that night had really positive messages, topics like not fitting in, eliminating racism, and staying true to yourself. And just to clarify, all straight edge is hardcore, but not all hardcore is straight edge.
We ended up standing behind the guitar amps so we would be out of the way because everyone in the audience went crazy when the bands played. And the band and audience were all on the same level. There wasn't any special lighting and the speakers were all cranked up to the highest setting. Some people stood off to the sides, nodding along to the beat of the song, while others crowded in front of the singer, singing along and sometimes even grabbing for the mic, while other people took part in what's called moshing, which involved a lot of rhythmic arm weaving and running back and forth across the mosh pit. A few people would purposely hit their friends while moshing, and occasionally someone would stumble into someone else who was standing too close to the mosh pit, but no one got hurt, and everyone was really courteous about apologizing or helping people up. People in the pit were just having a good time.
No one could really tell the difference from the band members in the audience because they looked and acted just like everyone else. The crowd predominantly was male and, from what we could tell, middle class. After the show was over, most people stood around talking and buying merchandise, which ranged from t-shirts to flags to vinyls to cassette tapes. No one was really available for an interview that night, but we were able to have an email interview with Dan Eldridge, 22, who plays guitar in the straight edge band Caught in a Crowd. As a true insider and contributor to the hardcore straight edge scene community, he was able to give us a little more insight into what it's really about. Rhiannon will be reading the questions and I'll read his responses.
What is your definition of hardcore?
Hardcore is a music genre based around the mindset of bettering yourself for yourself and finding a creative outlet to fuel your frustrations or thoughts.
What is your definition of straight edge?
Straight edge is a lifestyle based around the 3 X's. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't have promiscuous sex. It was derived from the song Out of Step by Minor Threat. Don't drink, don't smoke, don't fuck. At least I can fucking think. I can't keep up, I'm out of step with the world. This was misinterpreted as rules or guidelines for future generations because Ian MacKaye, vocalist for Minor Threat, later stated that those lyrics were personal and not a command.
What does straight edge do for you?
Straight edge for me isn't really anything in particular other than just a part of who I am. I don't seek out to tell anyone that I'm straight edge other than Xing up at my band's shows, and I don't reprimand people for drinking, smoking, etc. And I honestly don't even think about it. It's just who I am. The minute I break edge is the day that straight edge was ever anything outside of that.
How is hardcore perceived in your opinion?
Hardcore and punk and even metal is perceived by major culture in a negative way. Something as simple as the vocalist yelling words is looked at as different or unhealthy because they're not singing, but something these singers have to say just can't be sung without all the emotions behind it, or just the lack of a singing voice. Things like people going off, moshing, singing along, or jumping on top of one another is viewed as just another stupid teenager thing to do, to hurt one another or to get through whatever you're going through, and that's only partially true.
Does this perception differ from the reality of the scene?
It does and it doesn't. Something like the singer of a hardcore band yelling doesn't come off as weird to me anymore, and neither does moshing. But then again, there are people who are just in hardcore bands because they're bored and want to find something to do. Same with moshing. Some people go off just to hit and cause injuries, and to somehow step up their own social value and climb the social ladder. I have no clue what is at the top. People from the outside don't necessarily see somebody moshing and say, that guy is hitting on someone because they want to look cooler, but we see it. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what anybody else thinks of it because it means the world to me and I wouldn't want to live my life any other way.
Why did you choose to become part of the hardcore scene?
I first got into hardcore and punk when I was in 7th grade, and it was mostly because I had already listened to some really bad metal, but I had a friend whose brother was in a local hardcore band. He introduced me to it, and I was already infatuated with the idea of having band members who were on the same page as all the attendants, because I was always too shy to even think about meeting people in bigger metal bands, and there was no way I'd ever pay extra to meet anybody anyway. I quickly found more bands I liked at my first show, checked out bands they liked off their CDs, and then which turned into buying tapes and records, and it just grew from there.
What does hardcore do for the people involved?
More than anything, hardcore gives people a home. The whole mentality of hardcore and punk is not conforming to society's ideals and never really fitting in with the popular crowd. Although I got along with most of the popular crowd in high school, I'd be lying if I ever said I cared about anything they cared about. I still don't give a crap how good the Patriots are doing or how new the car your dad bought you is. Anyway, getting into hardcore young was the same mentality of I don't fit in. You quickly realize that the 25 to 400 people in your local hardcore punk scene feel the same way as you do. It's nice going somewhere and, with the exception of a few people, not having to worry about the superiority complex of all these people. You go to a show, meet some people, and make new friends. Have a blast, see some bands, and just let loose.
Why did you claim Edge? How were you introduced to it?
I think I was introduced pretty quick to Straightedge and what it was about because of my friend's brother. I wasn't lucky enough to get into hardcore through Black Flag, Minor Threat, or Misfits, but I quickly made up for it.
What does the Edge community think of those who choose to leave it?
There's a lot of different ways that people take other friends breaking Edge or anything like that. It's normally not a big deal at all if you're in the right scene. There are some idiots who form bands based off being really hard and tough while still holding true to their straight edge ideals, and when they break their clique, beats kids up for it. It's stupid. People have the Judge hammers, Judge was a straight edge band from New York, tattooed on their faces, but are seen breaking months after getting them. Anybody that has a clue, when friends break edge, they should move on while keeping an eye on them to make sure they don't hurt themselves. Something I've noticed is that nobody knows how to ease into what they're getting into. No one has a problem with people who drink or do drugs. I know I don't.
What do you contribute to the hardcore and Edge community?
I hate to toot my own horn, but I'm in two popular hardcore bands from Boston. One is a straight edge band and the other isn't. We play a fair amount. Something that we've made sure to do is to all stay modest with everything that comes our way. Two of my bands got signed to two of my favorite current labels in 1 year. That doesn't happen to many people at all. We've all made sure to stay modest and approachable, and through that I've met up with some of my closest friends, and through them coming up to me and just telling me that they liked how Caught in a Crowd played that night. It's a great feeling. Other than that, I try to help a few local promoters book shows, but I can't handle a whole deal booking on my own, and I'm working on a zine to come out someday called Love Fuzz.
Describe what it's like to attend and perform at an Edge Fest.
It's pretty unique. Not many things match it. My first Edge Day show was in 2009, which was Have Heart's last show. I wanted to go for a few years prior, but I was too young, unfortunately. Going to that was nothing like any of the others I've attended because of how big of a scale it was, but nonetheless it was amazing. It's normally just all the local Edge men and women hanging out, talking, trading and buying records, catching up with people far and wide who fly out for some shows and playing a show to a room filled with this sense of unity that doesn't come with most other shows. Although I'll always speak highly of hardcore and punk, no show ever matches how accepting people are to the ones that are attracted to the Edge Day show in Boston.
How has your life been changed by the Edge and hardcore communities, good and bad?
For the good, I've had a better grasp on reality, and I have more friends than I can count. I've met a lot of people from all over the world and got to experience more traveling in the past year than most people do in 10 years. I've been to every state on the eastern half of the United States and up into Canada for 2 shows, and I'll be flying to Europe for 3 weeks touring across the continent. For the bad, however, I think I just have lower expectations for myself now. Realistically, I want to have a career, wife, kids, and a nice home. But right now, I just want to live and get the life experiences and stories that nobody will be able to match. College can wait for me.
Is there an anthem of the straight edge movement?
I would say the anthem for the straight edge hardcore movement is Breaking Down the Walls by Youth of Today, Out of Step by Minor Threat, or Fed Up by Judge.
And here's the song that started it all, Out of Step by Minor Threat.
We also caught up with Frank Fiorella, 19, to talk about what it was like in hardcore for him. Fiorella works in the hardcore scene on a different level, and although a lot of what he has to say was the same as Dan, he too provides some insight into the scene. Frank also wasn't available for an interview face-to-face, so I'll be reading the questions and Rhiannon will read his answers. So do you mostly book hardcore shows?
I try to book all types of genres, but yes, mainly I book hardcore and metal bands.
How do people react when you tell them this?
It varies. The reactions from people in the hardcore and metal scene get really happy when they find that out. It can help them out and help me out. Other people usually give me a very strange look. I've gotten disgusted looks, confused looks. I've gotten just about every reaction you can think of.
How did you first get into hardcore music?
A very common question I get asked a lot. I guess that would be way back in 2008. The first hardcore band, and the only one at the time that I listened to, was Have Heart, a Boston hardcore band from Boston, Mass. Later on, though, into my freshman year of high school, I met a few people who listened to hardcore music a lot more than I did at the time, and they really brought me into hardcore music. A good friend of mine now actually brought me into my first hardcore show and got me into booking shows.
What do you think most people who don't listen to hardcore think about it?
Angry, emo, and suicide. All that. Whenever I tell people I listen to hardcore, again, most people give me a disgusted face. A lot of people think it's a bunch of angry kids that like to yell and swear and beat up random people. This, in some cases, is actually true. There's a bunch of stereotypes in music, and people just think of those and tend not to do research at all.
Why do you think these people have those opinions?
Like everything else, the media. They depict people that listen to hardcore music as angry, violent people. There's a notorious crew from Boston, Mass. Called FSU. Elgin James founded FSU, which originally stood for Fuck Shit Up. In the late 1980s in Boston, Massachusetts, he formed FSU to attack, beat, and purge drug dealers and violent white supremacists, neo-Nazi, and other various racist gangs from punk rock concerts. Everyone sees the bad side. They changed their name and changed for the best, getting rid of drugs from the streets.
How do you see people who listen to hardcore music?
How do I see them? Family. That's all we are. We're just one big family.
Why do you listen to hardcore music?
Everything about it I love. A lot of the musicians in the hardcore scene are some of the most talented musicians I've ever seen. But I would have to say the main thing for me is the lyrics. They tell a story. It's always something that you can relate to. Being left alone, significant other leaving you, family dying, horrible life as a kid, etc. It's always deep or meaningful, and I can always connect to it in some way. No matter my mood, there's always a hardcore song for it.
Why do you think others listen to it?
For the hundreds, if not close to 1,000 people that I've met in the hardcore scene, a good majority of it is for the same reason as me. For others, it's the music itself and the way they write the music. Others, I would say it's something as a gateway, a getaway from normal life.
What is your opinion of straight edge hardcore?
Do whatever your heart desires. It's something I would always say to people. For some people, being straight edge is a way of life, a choice that they make. Whether it be for God or for themselves, they choose to be it, and I will fully back anyone who does so. It has been around as long as hardcore punk, since the 1970s, if I'm correct. I do listen to straight edge hardcore bands quite often, actually. But for me personally, too much positive talk can really ruin my day.
Why do you think so few people know about it?
Well, it's been an underground genre since it started in the 1970s, and back then it was never really popularized by bigger labels. Even today, it's still the same. There are big labels in the hardcore scene: Bridge 9 Records, Death Wish Inc., Media Scare Records. There are also other labels such as Victory Records that sign hardcore-style bands. I feel like it's always been one of those lesser genres that no one particularly cares about. Rarely do hardcore bands play with metal bands or other genres of music. Plus, you only hear Lady Gaga, Imagine Dragons, and other pop alternative rock bands on the radio. Try finding a radio station that plays hardcore music. I'll make it simple for you, you won't. Like stated before, I feel like a lot of people are afraid of the genre and don't want it hitting the radios in people's homes. Hopefully soon that will all change.